So, I'm, in case you didn't know, a Christian. And as a Christian, I follow the Bible. And the Bible says there's only one God. Right? If so, if I believe that Christianity is right, then how come there are polytheistic religions? I'm not asking why there are different religions, because different people would interpret things differently. But why are there religions that believe in more than one God? Unless that was a common belief at one point. Well, I'm here to tell you today that the Old Testament is chock full of other gods. Not idols, other gods. What got me started on this venture was looking at Psalm 121, verses 1 through 2. The reason I looked at this is because it's the bridge of the Casting Crowns song. Because my help comes from, I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And I love Hebrew poetry, so that's why I got so excited about this. And I looked it up, and this is a psalm of ascension. And psalms of ascension were sung on the way to Jerusalem, usually during, Passover and whatever. Because you would, walk through these hills on your way. And so it makes sense that you lift your eyes up to the hills. I mean, the hills are right there, you're gonna look at it, right? I look at hills when I pass them, because it's just stuff to see. Where does my help come from is interesting. Because what do they need help from? Are these paths dangerous? Sure. Are there bandits? Absolutely. But what else is there? And then this need to ensure people that their help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Surely everybody who's going for Passover knows that it's Yahweh they're worshipping. So why do they need to reaffirm this? Well, surrounding Canaanite nations believed their gods lived up in the hills, like Moloch and Asherah and Baal and Chemosh, who we're going to talk about later. They all lived up in the hills. So when you're looking up at the hills, not only are you looking A, at the hills, and B, out for bandits, but you're looking potentially at where other gods are residing. And so I was curious about this, and so I looked elsewhere. I looked at Exodus 23, the first commandment, where God says, "You shall have no other gods before me." Not "you shall have no other gods," but "you shall have no other gods before me." It's okay to acknowledge these gods exist on the DL, but make sure it's on the DL and that I'm your number one. Which is kind of weird. The next commandment talks about how he's a jealous God. Which, if you assume he's talking about idols, sure, because he deserves the benefit because he's actually God. But if you assume it's because he doesn't want other gods taking his glory, then suddenly it looks a little different. And I did more digging, and there are a whole host of psalms that talk about this. Psalm 95, verse 3. Psalm 97, verse 7. Psalm 135, verse 5. What's really fascinating to me is 2 Kings chapter 3, where Israel and Moab go at it. And in verse 27, in the immediately preceding verses, I'm not sure which ones, the king of Moab sacrifices his son, the heir to the throne, to Chemosh. And then in 27, it says that a divine anger burned against Israel, and they returned to their homeland. A divine anger. Not the divine anger of the Lord, but a divine anger burned against Israel. And while Jehovah looks a little finicky in the Old Testament, if he has said that he is going to make sure his people win, which he did earlier in this chapter, he wouldn't make them lose. At least not according to my systematic theology teacher. So clearly this is Chemosh involving himself in their business. So I did some research, because I do research, and I started thinking about all the times that that God uses we. Let us make man in our image, for example. As Christians today, we often write that off as the royal we. But it's plural in Hebrew, and the royal we isn't really that big of a thing in Hebrew. And people are like, oh, it's the Trinity. Okay, that makes sense for us, sort of. But the Old Testament people are not going to understand anything about the Trinity. And it's plural for them. And don't get me started on those people who are including angels in this, because God does not equate himself with angels. So what's left? It's this idea that El is the, if you will, mother god, and that all the other gods are his children, and that Yahweh gets Israel and then is their god. So I found these terms. There's the first term you would assume is polytheism, but Israel didn't really worship these other gods. At the beginning, they just kind of didn't. They were henotheists. I have notes this way. And a henotheist is someone who believes multiple gods exist, but only worships one. And this is around 10th century BC, they were henotheists. And then they changed to monolarty, which is like henotheism in that you only worship one god, except it's the worship of others is now forbidden. It's not just you don't do it, it's you aren't allowed to. And then we travel to monotheism, which is the belief only one god exists. And there are a couple of reasons for this. I consulted a couple of patheos.com articles, which I don't have up at the moment, so I'm not going to dig for them and link them, but patheos.com is full of great stuff. And this one article seemed to suggest that this was simply because of the Babylonian exile and Israel needed an excuse for Yahweh, and so they're like, oh yeah, he's the only God, so, because the Bible is full of places in the Old Testament where God says he is the only God, too. I didn't write any of them down, because you probably can find them. And so, are we supposed to just dismiss all of the Old Testament as a fabrication? I don't think so. I'm huge on the Old Testament being metaphor, but dismissing the whole thing as fabricated merely to maintain the integrity of a fictitious god is a bit unsettling, to put it mildly. As such, I'm going to plead a doctrine Christians call progressive revelation. Now, progressive revelation is this idea that as time goes on, God reveals more of himself and us and the world and the relationships between the three of us to us. It's explored in the covenant, because we have the covenant of works, where God's like, you do good stuff and I am good to you. You do bad stuff and I'm not. And then we have the covenant of grace, which first appears in Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity between you and the woman and her offspring and hers, and you will crush your head and you will strike his heel. And that tells the story of Jesus. But you don't know it's the story of Jesus until more about that is revealed, and as time goes on, people learn more about that until ultimately Jesus comes. And the same can be said, I think, here. Initially, you have this idea that there are all these gods, and then you get this idea that you're supposed to only worship one of them, which we see with, Abraham. Abraham, he's called by God to leave the other. His dad made like idols. He's called to worship Yahweh. And then we go through, not only are you supposed to worship one, but there is only one. And then we get to like the Trinity, which is Trinitarian monotheism. So where does that leave me? I mean, I believe there's one God. I think that's a tenet of Christianity. But I think it's important to acknowledge that that belief is not held throughout the entire Bible. And I think it's an interesting stepping point for exploring how spiritual beings, not other gods, but like angels and demons and whatever, are more present than we give them credit for, if that makes sense. So using this as a springboard to investigate that, I think is really useful. But it's also just really fascinating to talk about this stuff. And I know I can't bring stuff like this up at school, but man, that's what YouTube is for. So anyway, was this video informative? Leave a like. Was it inflammatory? Leave a comment. Was it intriguing? Subscribe. Hit me up on Twitter or Tumblr using the hashtag AskAzaria, or the messaging system to be featured tomorrow in our Just Asking Monday. Odds are you're not going to see this until I've already shot the Just Asking Monday, so that's fine. Send them for the next one. I'm not picky. I'll answer your questions whenever. Just send them. Anyway, thanks for humoring me. Thanks for getting the video burned to almost 500 views. Holy cow. Channel in total is almost at 1,600 views on everything. Holy cow. I'm just really grateful. I hope you have a great day.